Okay, good evening, folks. Thanks for attending this session of the Grand Rapids Community College Social Science Department Race and Ethnicity Conference. Just a little bit about the conference. This is the fourth year that we've engaged in this type of conference planning to celebrate Black History Month, and we're very pleased tonight to have a guest speaker that embodies so much of what our department tries to impart to our students and to our community, Dr. David Pilgrim from Ferris State University. And I'll talk about him in just a few moments, but I did want to mention that this is a series of events. It's not just the event tonight. It's a 4-day conference with 10 separate events, and this will be continuing tomorrow. So if you have any interest in what you see here tonight and you'd like more of that, you can check out our website, www.grcc.edu/race conference to get more information about the events tomorrow. Tonight's guest speaker, we're very pleased to have as our keynote speaker for this Race and Ethnicity Conference. Dr. David Pilgrim is one of the country's leading experts on issues relating to multiculturalism, diversity, and race relations. He's been interviewed by NPR, Time Magazine, the BBC, and dozens of newspapers, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. Dr. Pilgrim is best known as the founder and curator of the Jim Crow Museum, which is a 5,000-piece collection of racist artifacts located at Ferris State University. The museum incorporates objects of intolerance to try to teach tolerance. And these artifacts are used by scholars, students, and civil rights workers to better understand historical and contemporary expressions of racism. Dr. Pilgrim has been invited to deliver public lectures at many institutions, including Stanford, Colby College, the University of Michigan, Smith College, the University of North Carolina, and GRCC. Dr. Pilgrim has a PhD from Ohio State University in applied sociology, and in 2004 he produced the documentary film Jim Crow's Museum to explain his approach to battling racism, which he'll talk about tonight. And his short stories have been published in numerous magazines and periodicals, including Obsidian, African American Review, AIM, and Shooting Star. And in 2006, Dr. Pilgrim served as a consultant with Will Smith for the UPN television show All of Us, which I think technically makes him a movie star or a rock star. I'm not sure which one. But without further ado, I'll bring Dr. David Pilgrim to the podium.
Thank you, and he told me how to do this, and I've already forgotten. Can you, how's everybody doing? Oh, what a lively crowd this is. So once, as he's turning that on, let's get some ground rules. Number one, if I tell a joke or I'm trying to be funny, I'll do this. That way you know I'm joking and it's okay to laugh. Number two, if you have a cell phone on, please turn it off. Or at least put it on vibrate. That way you'll enjoy it, but it won't interfere with the rest of us. Number three, there are some images that we're going to use that are offensive, and I don't use them for shock value. I don't use them to titillate you. I use them the same way I use them when we're at the university, that is to teach people, okay? Sometimes people accuse us of being a shrine to racism, and that's not what it is. What it is taking really ugly objects that I call garbage, and finding a way to contextualize them and use them to teach. So let's go ahead and get started. And I know your time is valuable, and so I'm going to just jump right into it. That little room right there, we have 5,000 pieces. You don't have to be a physicist or a mathematician, how you doing, to recognize that you cannot get 5,000 pieces in that room. And if any one of you has $1 million, that's what we lack to move the museum into a bigger facility. And for those of you that don't have $1 million, no gift is too large. So if you have 50 bucks away, okay, I just have to get that out of my system. I've been trying to get this this stuff moved for 10 years at least. As you can notice, you could probably get 20 people in there. So what are we? We're not a museum. These are some mistakes I made. Go ahead.
Can I fix your mics?
Yeah, sure.
It's about to fall.
That's all right. There we go. Was it just annoying you, or was it
No, it was about the.
Okay, all right. It's not like when I'm at home and my shirt's up or something.
No.
Okay. You got like a monk thing going? Yeah, okay, like a monk, okay. All right, so had I to do it over again, I would not have named this the Jim Crow Museum for a couple reasons. One, we're not a museum in the traditional sense. We don't have regular scheduled hours. We don't have tours. We don't have didactic panels. We don't have signage at all. As a matter of fact, the only signs we have are racist signs. If we ever were to move, we would add those things. But what we are now is a learning laboratory. And by the way, I wouldn't have named us Jim Crow, because that implies that we only have objects from the 1870s to the 1960s. And one of the lucky things I did collecting was that I continued to collect contemporary objects. I probably have 1,000 objects made since 1990. So we are a learning lab. How many of you in here are taking a sociology class? Okay, good. I see you're all grading me. I should grade you. I should ask you some questions. Do you know the difference between material culture and non-material culture? Anybody? Material culture would be all those things in a society that you can touch. The architecture, the cars, the clothes, everything you can put your hands on. Non-material culture would be things like attitudes, taste, and values. I believe that you can learn about the non-material culture by looking at the material culture. So I can learn about a society's attitudes, taste, and values by the things that are produced. Okay? I'm going to have to use some ugly words. The two worst words, in my opinion, and this is weird for me to say the two worst words because I'm a sociologist and we don't believe words have meanings, at least not inherent meanings. We believe that they're just sound signs and we give them meanings. But having said that, the two words, in my opinion, that have the most venom, the most layers of hatred in our culture are nigger and cunt. Those two words seem to me to be layered with venom and hatred. Here you have an object. It was a bank. If you leave here with nothing else, leave here with this, knowing that the 5,000 objects that we have are everyday objects. It's a bank. Now, it's not just a bank. It's a bank with messages behind it. It's a bank that has a caricatured image of people from Africa or African descent people. But it's also a bank. And the objects that I show you, they have some other functionality. And that's important. We think of propaganda as leaflets. At least I always do. I always think of the Vietnam War and people dropping down leaflets on the soldiers, or someone handing you something, trying to, persuade you to believe something else. But a bank can also be propaganda. Does that make sense? Okay. Our goal is to get people to talk openly and honestly about race relations, and racism. And I can tell you, every group I speak to, I travel, thank you for inviting me. And Professor Light, you give him a hand, please. He's been a very gracious host. He hasn't done everything right. I mean, there's about 4 things he screwed up, but he has been, for the most part, he's been pretty good about it. So thank you for your kind hospitality and inviting me here. I travel to a lot of places, and in every group, there is someone at the end when we do the question and answer part, and they raise their hands and they say, "Sir, I mean you no disrespect," and you know something's coming. "Sir, I mean you no disrespect, but if you personally were to stop traveling around the country having these kinds of discussions, racism would go away." That doesn't even make stupid sense. First of all, I'm one person. Second of all, it's based on some really faulty assumptions. One of those assumptions is that we don't already talk about race. We talk about race all the time. We talk about it in our living rooms. We talk about it in corridors, in restrooms. We talk about it in the kitchen. We talk about it in the jokes we tell. But we talk about it in places where we feel safe. And often that safety means a place where our ideas are not challenged. The trick is to create better, bigger, safer places so that people can talk, so that white Americans are not afraid that if they talk openly and honestly, they're going to say something and someone calls them a bigot or racist, And black and brown and red and yellow people are not afraid to talk about it for fear that they're going to offend their white listeners or the others. Another thing I think when someone says that is this. What they're really saying is, we've already dealt with that. That's a question that we've answered. And I think to myself, think of a parallel. Will we ever get to a point where we don't have to discuss relations between men and women? I mean, it's kind of silly to even think that, isn't it? Hello? I know you're out there. When I walked in here, I walked past the back of your heads. And I mean, that's just, it is really a way of saying that it makes us uncomfortable, and that's okay. This right here is an old image, but it's a new object. It's an old image, but it's a new object. The image is from the 1940s. The object is from the 1990s. What someone did was to take an old paper image and convert it to a metal image. I think education works best when we suspend judgment at the door and listen, but I always encourage my audiences to not do that. Instead, what I encourage my audiences to do is this. Just assume that everything I say is wrong, that I'm making it up, and go and see. And here's an example. When you get home, go to eBay, go to Yahoo, go to Cafe Press, go to any internet auction house, and type in a race-based word and see the objects that are being sold. And what you will discover is what I'm getting ready to say. We have 5,000 objects in the Jim Crow Museum. I bet you, and unfortunately I'm a betting man, I bet you could purchase any of those objects today. Now, as startling as that may sound, I'll make a statement that's even stronger than that. The images that are on those 5,000 objects, they're all being reproduced today. That's an example. Whenever there's a race-based incident in this country, it shows up in the objects that are produced. Now, how many of you remember, I got to start over. You want to reintroduce me? Okay. How many of you remember when Don Imus referred to was it Rutgers? He referred to the Rutgers basketball team as what? He didn't call them hoes, he called them nappy-headed hoes, okay? And so you're thinking, wow, that was rude and whatever else. But from my standpoint, the first thing I notice is I start seeing a bunch of objects. In this case, a T-shirt. How many of you have heard of Cafe Press? Raise your hands. Okay, good. So I purchased this from one of the merchants on Cafe Press. And what it says is, you are a nappy-headed hoe. Go ahead and sue me. Now, that's sort of funny. And one of the points I'd like to make today is a thing can be funny and offensive. Those are not mutually exclusive categories. These are some other objects that showed up. Imus was right. I love nappy-headed hoes and nappy-headed pimps with Reverend Sharpton and Reverend Jackson. And I gave a talk over in the library the other day and created a little bit of a stir because I expressed my disappointment in the way the Reverend Jesse Jackson behaved during the recent campaign. Because I found his behavior, I'm certainly not being objective now, I'm showing values and all that other stuff, but I found his behavior immature and maybe even jealous, as it were. But I don't think you need to create a backpack with that on it. In this case, what you have is someone wanted their 15 minutes of fame. And so what they did was they created a fake exhibit and pretended that they had been censored to try to generate some controversy, and then from that controversy tried to generate some sales. But what they did was to use those two little girls who were in the White House. And, okay, I'll let that speak for itself. When President Obama was Senator Obama, he was at an engagement, and he referred to one of the reporters. She asked him a question, and he just said, wait a minute, or something like that, sweetie. Now, he shouldn't have done that for a lot of reasons. first of all, sweetie is a term of endearment that should be confined to a person you have a pre-arranged relationship with. Does that make sense? You know, I mean, women are not chicks and honey buns and all this other stuff unless that's the kind of relationship you have with them. In this case, he does not have, presumably did not have that relationship with her and used what is clearly sexist language. Almost immediately, images of President, then Senator Obama, start showing up as a pimp. As a pimp. All right, again, I ask you, when you leave here, go to Google, go to eBay, and look at the images that are there of him as a pimp. As a matter of fact, just type in Obama and pimp. How many of you have been to a pimp and whore party? Raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4. How many of you have heard of pimp and whore parties? Raise your hand. Every young person in here. Oh, and actually some of the teachers. All right, here's a question for you. I may mean this as a rhetorical question, and I'm not sure. When you, those of you that went to a pimp and whore party, and it's actually a pimp hoe party. There's lights in my eye, okay? Those of you that went, I'm assuming the guys, and I'm making an assumption here, the guys went as pimps. Is that right? Hello? Who was your role model? In other words, when you were at the party as a pimp, how do you know how to act like a pimp? From Snoop Dogg. Okay. Anyone else? All right. Now let me ask you another question. Name a white pimp. Who? Mike Dicker. Are you talking about from that silly commercial? His whole career. No, be serious. Name a white pimp. Hugh Hefner. That's actually a good answer. That's actually a good answer. I'm going to have to stop asking that question to audiences, because that's actually a good answer, because he's got some pimp going, you know. You get my point I'm trying to make, right? Is that pimp in this culture has almost become a synonym for what? For blacks, for black men. Okay. So let's talk about racial caricatures. Now, I'm not going to ask you who you voted for. I voted for Senator McCain. I'm lying. I love that show. What is that show? The Middle. I love that little boy. Every time, did you steal the apple? No, I'm lying. I mean, that is the funniest thing I've seen in a long time. So I voted for Senator McCain. I'm lying. I mean, I certainly could have voted for him, you know. I mean, there were many things that were admirable about him. But I don't care who you voted for. And the images I'm going to show you, I want you to put aside who you voted for, okay? And I want you just to think about the way we handle things in this culture sometimes. So when I get a person, and this person makes a good point. What he's saying is this, basically, is I don't like the stimulus plan. There are quite a few people who didn't like the stimulus plan. Most of them didn't receive some of the money. I don't like the health care plan. Now, there's a whole lot of Americans don't like the health care plan. I don't like the president is too liberal on gays, or I don't, you know, it's a whole string of things. All right, that's fine. That's fine. That's what a democracy is, right? Right? It's the clash of ideas, the triumph of dialogue, all that good stuff. But the opposition to President Obama is often expressed in traditional racial caricaturing that has nothing to do with the policies. And that's one of the things I'm going to show you today. In the museum, we have many caricatures. All right, here's another point. For those of you that need to go back, when my students used to go to a presentation, they had to come back with like 8 points that the person made. All right, I don't know if your teachers are making you do that, but if they are, here's one. Every group, especially every minority group in this culture, and maybe in every culture, has been caricatured. It is a cost of being a minority. Did you hear me when I said that? So if you go back to the 1940s and look at the Japanese and the Japanese Americans, what you'll find is that they were caricatured. And while we put 110 or 120,000 Japanese, but mostly Japanese Americans in internment camps, we were also creating images of Japanese and Japanese Americans as tojo. With Native Americans, you've seen images of Native Americans with deep red skin and blood red eyes and drunk or as savages, or the women as whores. You've seen those images. You've seen images of Jews as greedy merchants. I mean, the internet's full of them, just full of them. Every group has been caricatured. You've seen caricatures of women as nags, hags, whores, right? These are every group. And poor whites. Poor whites. I often think that poor whites in our culture are caricatured much the same way that racial minorities are caricatured. So, for example, we do that kind of, this thing where there's this one image of poor whites as the Waltons. Hardworking, Christian, lovers of humanity, don't know when to stop saying goodnight. This really, this group. And then we have the image of poor whites from like Deliverance. You remember the movie Deliverance? Boy, them shoulders, some purty lips. You know that movie? As trash. Please don't call people trash. We do it. That has become a mainstreamed way of referring to poor white people as trash. Trailer trash, poor white trash. Has everybody heard that? Okay, that's a caricature. Okay? And that caricature is imbued with a number of stereotypes, and they become justifications for mistreatment. So these are some of the caricatures historically of African American men. The Tom, that's the person who's just eager to please. It's weak, usually old, desexualized, And I could give you a really good history of Uncle Tom and the movie and the play and what Harriet Beecher Stowe meant to his image to be versus what it became. But that Tom image, that silliness, right? The Buck, the hypersexual. And by the way, these caricatures, the Tom, the Buck, the Sambo, the Coon, the Tragic Mulatto, the Savage, and the Savage, those go all the way back to slavery. But they have modern day manifestations. The Buck is this hypersexual deviant. I'm so glad we no longer conceptualize, portray, and perpetuate the idea of African Americans as hypersexual deviants. I mean, if I look at our TVs, I never see black people portrayed as being obsessed with sex. Are you gonna make me do this every time? Okay. The Sambo, this is the black man is just stupid, childlike, irresponsible. The Brute, this is probably the dominant image now of young black men in our society. Except today we call it thugs and thugging. And it's amazing to me to see these middle-class boys from upstate New York putting on a persona of being a brute so that they can sell records to suburban white boys and girls. That's deep. I mean, that is just mind-bogglingly deep. That's like, I'll give you another example of that. The majority of the Southern and Eastern European immigration to this country came between 1880 and 1920. And many of them were Jews, or they were Irish, or they were Italians. In the case of the Jews and the Irish, one of the ways they assimilated into the American society was through entertainment, and one of the dominant entertainment forms for them was blackface. So what you had then was them putting on blackface to pretend to be black in order to be accepted as white. Now, if that's deep, this is even deeper. When blacks were eventually allowed to be on stage, they had to blacken their black skin to pretend to be Jews, pretending to be black to assimilate as white. You can't even keep up with that. I lost you when I first started that. The Coon, this lazy, good-for-nothing, whatever. I look at Chris Tucker movies, like Friday. He is the rebirth of Step and Fetch It. Go to the internet and just type in Step and Fetch It. If I close my eyes and open them again, I'm like, wow, Step and Fetch It has been born again. Except now he makes $10 million a movie and hangs out with Jackie Chan. Tragic Mulatto, the idea that a black person or that a person who had any black ancestry had been tainted in some way and was impure and less in some way. The Savage, the third world primitive, the idea of the black who just hates all white, and then finally, and I'll talk about in a minute, the so-called magic Negro. So let's look at some of the images of President Obama and see how they fit into these traditional ideas. This right here was originally, and if anybody in this country should hate Photoshop, it's President Obama. Photoshop is killing him. But what this was a picture from, someone took a picture of how homeless people in our big cities are being used to shine the shoes of the middle class and the wealthy. And it's a very powerful class-based statement. But what they did was photoshopped it. Someone in Colorado got in trouble because they sent it around. The idea here, see, the Tom, the servant. Do you get that? Okay. How many of you are familiar with the Gen 6? Come in. Come in. Okay. Okay, that's fine. How many of you are familiar with the Gen 6? Okay. You know what happened down there, so I don't have to redo it. But what I will tell you is that there was a lot of pressure on then candidate Obama to come out and say, oh, this is just racism, this is just whatever else. And he said, and as best I could figure out, I need to figure out what happened before I say anything. And Reverend Jesse Jackson accused him of what? Acting what? White. Okay. And that's, all right. Anyway. The ironic thing here is that the person who referred to President Obama, then candidate Obama, as articulate and clean was who? $100 to anybody who knows. No, not teachers. And you ruined it for everybody else. And it wasn't American money anyway. It was monopoly money or something. But, so he referred to him as articulate and clean. And I know you are taping this, so I have to watch the stories I tell. Usually, I give a talk. I just got back from Missouri somewhere, and I say what I have to say, then I go get on an airplane. And so, but here, I live in Rockford, so I got to be careful. Anyway, let me just say that in a certain school district that doesn't have a lot of diversity among its faculty, a couple years ago, I'm at a baseball game. I played in the city majors in town, and during one of the innings, I'm listening to the people in the stands, and they were talking about how this certain school district, how they had just hired their first, elementary school, had just hired their first African-American male teacher. And one person says to the other person, and he's clean. Now, if I was in India, I would know that they meant that he was not from the lower caste. In my neck of the wood, I'm guessing they meant the same thing. You follow where I'm going with this? They meant the same thing, that he was clean. See, that becomes a code word for something, doesn't it? Are you following me? Or then maybe he was just clean. How often have you referred to someone as clean? I mean, now, some of us are well-dressed, and so people go, oh, that brother's clean. Oh, she is clean. But who uses that word like that anymore? I think they meant something else. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the Tea Party, but this was one of the signs at the Tea Party. And here again is the idea of President Obama as a Tom, this kind of kowtowing, bowing kind of person. And, there's a lot of controversy about whether or not he bowed. The American president doesn't bow to anyone under any circumstances. And he showed bowing. This is him as a buck. Now, I think it's okay to laugh because, at least at this, because I think most people look funny as a pimp. I mean, when you, on Halloween, when you see people dressed up as a pimp, it's just funny. I mean, because their suits are outlandish, purple suits with the weird hat. When you watch Seinfeld and you see Kramer with the pimp suit, you just laugh. People look funny as pimps look funny as pimps, all right? So, but here's this idea of him as a pimp, okay? Here we get mixed messages about his sexual prowess. Now we get to the image as a Sambo. Again, this kind of idiot. Again, go to Google. Just go to the internet. You will find tons of images of the president as a childlike buffoon. Now, some of you could say, and I think you would be accurate, well, wasn't it the case that President Bush, the younger, was often portrayed as a buffoon? You're right, he was. Okay? And it has become common to degrade the President of the United States. So I'm not suggesting that just to present him in that way is a racial message. I'm simply saying it is consistent with racial messages. This is the image of the brute. Remember what I talked about, the brute, the menacing, the one who scares the living daylights out of mainstream America. Now, this is a Harvard-trained attorney, right? This is Harvard, right? Yes. Am I the only one in here? Okay. He doesn't look threatening at all. I mean, he does not look threatening. But he looks threatening right there, doesn't he? Yeah. He's thugging it. Thugging it in the White House. You know, got his hands raised up and he's thugging it. Cut that part out of the thing. Now, I'll say this, and I say this wherever I go. This, again, is a T-shirt. And what's a T-shirt? It's an everyday object. People wear T-shirts. You get the whole propaganda thing, right? It's not just a T-shirt. You know that the case with O.J. Simpson divided this country. Everybody know that? Were you alive during that time? Okay. Very young? Yeah, but you know the story. Okay. And it's okay to know things that happened before we were born, right? Is it? Okay. That case divided this country, split us. It pulled back racial wounds from many, many, many years. And again, I'll do the unobjective thing. I think O.J. was guilty. As a matter of fact, had I been on the jury, I'm pretty sure, because I would have found him guilty, because like many Americans, I was glued to my television, and if I heard all the evidence, that would have probably been my vote. Now, I am prejudiced in the sense that I was trained to be a warden. My wife, who just refused to come in here and sit down, is trained to be a prosecutor. So in my house, you did it. You know, everybody's guilty. The students that I taught at Ferris, when I taught, were criminal justice students. Right? So I'm not totally objective about the thing, but whether I thought he was guilty or innocent, it has nothing to do with President Obama. And linking those two things together, it's not even a thinly veiled racial ploy. It's just a racial ploy. I don't know how many of you remember the movie, well, you weren't alive, but the movie, The Birth of a Nation. And it's hard to watch because it's a silent movie, but it was like the first great movie in this country. The first huge movie in this country, huge. And that movie, and I'm not going to do it justice now because we don't have time, but it basically sent the message that Reconstruction, that the end of slavery and Reconstruction ruined this country because it freed ignorant, savage blacks to dominate whites. And that movie led to the resurgence, the first resurgence of the KKK. Okay? And in that movie, it showed black legislators, because now they have in power, it showed black legislators in these houses of Congress eating fried chicken, not KFC, they didn't have it yet, but other fried chicken, with their feet on the table, acting in stereotypical ways. And that's kind of the image. Matter of fact, burn that image in your head, and then look at the image from the movie. See? That's the advantage of knowing a little bit of history. It's also the disadvantage. And then here's the idea of this mulatto piece. Matter of fact, with President Obama coming to office, the word mulatto, which was falling out of favor in this country, you start hearing words like multiracial and biracial and triracial. All of a sudden, the word mulatto came back. That's old school. Well, in this case, you have a guy. This is actually a sign in someone's front yard. And you know, if you're gonna be prejudiced, then you should invest in your bigotry and learn the right words. Muslim is different from muslin. Muslin is a cloth. Muslim is a a religion. And I don't even know what half-breed, plaid maybe, but what would half-breed cloth look like? The other thing I've noticed is when President Obama was elected president, and by the way, I voted for Republicans in the past, I voted for Democrats in the past, I voted for independents in the past. But when he was elected, I was upstairs, my wife was downstairs, and when they announced at 11 o'clock that, you know, what the results were, she came up the stairs and we held each other at the top of the stairs and we cried. And it was a 40-year cry, is what it was. Well, at the same time we were crying, there were other Americans crying too. But they were crying for a different reason, okay? And this would have been one of them. He was crying because they believe the world's coming to an end now. They believe my grandmama was right when she says if a black man's ever elected president, the world's going to end. She believed that literally, or they believed that literally. But you know, during that period, right after that, I started hearing a lot of people saying, this is a great day for America. Did anybody hear that? And I also heard people say, this is a great day for black Americans. Did anybody hear that? I did not hear a single person say this right here. This is a great day for mixed Americans. I didn't hear a single person say that. Now, you would think with all the talking that was going on, someone would have said that, wouldn't you? You know? Now, I'm mixed. My mixture is different from his. My melting pot's Native American and African American, but I still think it's pretty cool that you have a mixed race president of the United States who will acknowledge it. This is that image of a savage. So you come into the Jim Crow Museum and you see hundreds of objects that are about blacks as savages. And then you notice that some of them were just made. Some of them were just made. When you talk about, we have a traveling exhibit called Them. I wish that had been out at the time we created that exhibit, because this is really an example of us versus them. He's not one of us. He's just not one of us. And I hear people keep saying this. His father was Kenyan and he was born in Hawaii. And I'm thinking, Hawaii is a state. It's a new state, relatively speaking. It's a state. I mean, just because it's not Iowa, or just because it's not Michigan, doesn't mean it's not a real state. I keep hearing people say that over and over. He's Hawaiian, if he's anything at all. I want proof that he has been born. Impeach the Kenyan. That's brutal. That's brutal. I used to do a thing with my students, and I learned to stop using sports analogies because not everybody's into sports, but I'm going to use one if I could beg your indulgence. Michael Chang, the tennis player. Everybody remember Michael Chang, the tennis player? He had fast feet and thick thighs and all. Won the French Open in what was the most, he showed more human resiliency than any human I've ever seen. Both legs cramping, down a set, and came back and beat Yvonne Little. You could see on the TV screen his legs shaking. You could see it on the screen. Michael Chang was a great tennis player. Great. When I would say to my students, what is he? In the way we mean that in America. They would say, he's Chinese. Or some of them, because they thought it was more progressive, would say, Chinese American. And I'd say, okay, look at Andre Agassi. How many of you remember Andre Agassi? Okay, well, he's still around. And I always liked Agassi. A haircut and a forehand. Just a great, great, great forehand. And used to have really long hair like I did. I had hair down to here. I don't need I didn't do that thing. Do not laugh. That would be cruel. This is, I had it when I needed it. Let's just put it like that. Anyway, Andre Agassi, I say to my students, what is he? They go, he's American. I go, well, Michael Chang's a second-generation American. So is Andre Agassi. So one's from China, his parents are from China, the other's from what, Iran? Okay? Then I look and say, what about Pete Sampras? You know Peter Sampras? I said, well, what do you see when you see Pete Sampras? They go, an American. He's from California. I go, he's a first-generation American. He's Greek. All right, now, if that doesn't show you that we have that appearance and racial appearance is linked to perceptions of nationality, I don't know what I can tell you. So what I say to you is, when you see a sign up here that says impeach the Kenyan, or the Kenyan, how many generations have your folks been here? And this is the idea of President Obama as a person who's going to prove that blacks are now dominating. That sign, Obama's plan, white slavery. The internet is full of that idea. Now, how many of you take a psychology class? Anybody? Have you gotten to the term projection yet? Okay. The idea that people project onto others some of what's inside of them, their fears, attitudes, tastes, values. Glenn Beck said on TV that President Obama has a deep-seated hatred for white people or the white culture. I'm on some Republican mailing lists. I get some of this same kind of sentiment there. It's no surprise why the Democrats and Republicans are having a hard time working together, because if you deify your opponents the way they do, you leave yourself no room to work with them. I think President Obama was right to say that. This is the idea of President Obama as the racist anti-American. During the campaign, at first he was presented as a Muslim. And when did being a Muslim become bad? I mean, I guess you could say, well, 9/11 created all of this anti-Muslim sentiment in our society. But I will tell you this, too. When I first got to Ferris, which was 20 years ago, despite my youthful appearance, 20 years ago, when I got to Ferris, I discovered among my students there were two groups of people they didn't like. And it came out in the discussions. Those two groups were Muslims, especially those people that came from the Detroit area, the Southfield area. They brought with them prejudices and just a general dislike of Muslims and Arabs generally, and gays. They were united in that. So I can't say that some of those sentiments didn't already exist in our society, but it's like, throughout the primary and the general election, people just trying to prove he's a Muslim and not a Christian. Recent Daily Cause poll, and I will say this, though, that is a liberal website. They interviewed 2,000 Republicans. What they discovered was that 64% thought that the president was either a racist or might be a racist. It's hard not to do the comment on that. Why someone would have that on some thongs, I can't say the word thong, but that's just, you don't have to be a Freudian to have problems with that object. During the, anybody remember the fist pump? Okay, now I noticed Professor Light did a fist pump. Who'd you do the fist pump with?
Professor Foster.
With Professor Foster. You too, terrorist, you.
That's right.
You too, terrorist. How many of you in here have done a fist pump with somebody? You terrorist, you. On a national TV, on a respected station, well, Fox, on a station, you have someone insinuate that the fist pump was actually a what? A terrorist bump. A terrorist. What? That is bizarre. My question to people who believe that President Obama is a terrorist would be this: what do you think he's going to do? So they get up there and they do a fist pump. And the questions all across, was that a terrorist bump? I love satire. You won't find anybody in this country who likes satire, but if the audience doesn't get satire, it just extends the thing that's being satirized. Does that make sense? I mean, I used to like Dave Chappelle. I believe that segment about the Klansman who doesn't know he's black, that's the deepest thing ever done by an American. That is just profound, and it's so layered. right? It's brilliant satire. On the other hand, some of the stuff he did about crack addicts and the like just looked like crack addicts and extend the idea that blacks are crack addicts. In this case, the problem I have with this as satire is it's not satirizing the purveyors of bitterness, it's satirizing the victims. Now, what if the Obamas had done that? What if he'd have planted turn to the person next to you and give them a 3-second full mouth kiss? And you will realize how long that is. Some of you haven't been kissed in 3 seconds for, consecutively in a long time. And I'm assuming it's people from this side over. It is unfortunately the case that some people here just recently been kissed. And so, but 3 seconds is a long time to have your tongue in somebody's mouth, okay? Especially on national TV. And I really believe, if you remember with Vice President Gore, he was getting criticized for being, staid and not having feelings and emotions and the like. And it may have been a little orchestrated. Plus, he had just got the nomination and he was happy, okay? And I'm telling you, if the Obamas had done that, it would have tapped into some of our ideas about black sexuality. If they'd have stood up there and did that. I just wanted to show you that when I'm talking about the internet and where I purchase stuff from, that I'm not making it up. And here's a shirt with the Klan running after Obama, and it says, "Run, Obama, run." And that started before he even was officially in the campaign. Did you ever see Eyes on the Prize? Anybody ever see Eyes on the Prize? It's a long series, and it's a brilliantly and beautifully done series. But there's one part of that, and I don't know if it's 4 parts or 8 parts to that thing. It's a lot of them. But there's a part in there where they're talking to someone, and he's talking about when the police, the federal police, I should call them federal police, but federal police officers, when they came down south to search for the bodies of Goodman, Swerner, and Cheney. Remember that? And they had to drag the rivers looking for those 3 boys who had been killed, doing civil rights work. And when they drug the bodies, I think it was in Paradise, Mississippi. What a oxymoron. It's kind of like Wealthy Street. You know what I'm saying? It's just, gotta watch where I am here in a minute. But, Paradise, Mississippi, right? And they drugged for those boys' bodies. They eventually found their bodies. But you know what? And I just remember that person saying it, that we found dozens of unnamed young black people that were in those rivers. Now, the part that there's no one who's unnamed. Well, you don't know their name. But the bigger point is that in this country's history, we had somewhere officially between 4,000 and 5,000 Africans and African descent people publicly lynched. So to make a joke out of that is in bad taste, at least. I'm going to go a little bit faster. Here we have some of the images of African American women. The mammy, everybody heard of the mammy kind of image, like Aunt Your Mama stuff. Again, the tragic mulatto. The Jezebel would be the idea of the African American woman as a whore. You find that with a lot of ethnic groups where the women are portrayed in this way. And then the sapphire, that's this rude, angry kind of, and that's a dominant image today. If you look at images of Ms. Obama, what you find is she is rarely portrayed as a mammy. However, there are many images of her that try to find flaws with her physique. Images about her buttocks, about her arms, and about her face structure. And implicit in all of that is that she is not the traditional ideal of what femininity is in this culture. Here's a T-shirt we bought where it had Cindy McCain on one side. It says age 54, elegant and classy. And then it says Michelle, age 44, bitter and hateful. And it's called Beauty and the Beast. I believe that not only is she not a mulatto, but in some ways, and this is kind of weird to say, but in some ways, she validates his credentials in the African American community, if that makes sense. And I believe, and would love to see someone do a study, I believe that much of the support that President Obama got in African American communities was actually because of Michelle Obama. This is her as a hoochie mama. Again, him as a pimp. And there's just nothing about her that screams hoochie mama. Nothing, okay? I've collected over 2,000 images that defame women because my next goal is to start a museum where we do the same thing with those images that we do with the black images. And there's nothing in her persona, but that doesn't stop people from creating the image. And I don't know if you remember this incident where she was referred to as Obama's baby mama. And again, that's not so subtle. Baby mama does not have the same social status as wife. Duh. Okay? And to refer to the First Lady as Obama's baby's mama, a baby mama. And this is probably the most popular negative image of her, that she's just angry, that she's bitter, that she hates white people, that she just lives to hate. That's a greeting card. Remember again, these are not just images. These are actual things. You would send a greeting card to someone. You know, I tell you what, there are a lot of people in this country from minority groups who would say the kind of things she said. And I don't know why that's shocking to many Americans. I just don't know. What she basically was saying was, for the first time in my adult life or something like that, I really feel pride in my country. There are many people that feel like that. Many people. But it was taken to mean she was anti-America and that she was anti-white. Michelle Obama hates us. That's a handbag over there. We're planting melons in the White House garden. Google ran this long story about how they, in effect, don't control what appears when you use their search engine. Because they do it, it's basically a popularity thing, you know, most used piece. So if people constantly search something, it raises up. And so then when you search, that thing appears more likely. When you just type in her name, this is the first thing that pops up in the internet. At least it was up until recently. I think it still is. So, have we entered a post-racial society? Many people say that we have entered a post-racial society, and the proof of it is the election of a mixed-race, black-identified candidate to the White House, and that proves that we have moved into a period where race no longer matters in this culture. I was at the Deltaplex, up in Comstock Park a couple years ago, and I said to one of the people there, $5 again, it was a gun show. And I said to a guy, sell me your most popular target. And he says, you're not going to want it, which, of course, let me know I was going to want it. And that was it, over to your right. Now, when you have a target, by definition, you got to be shooting at something. That's why it's a target. But I think it matters that that's the target that's most popular. And if you look at this thing on the other side called the official running nigger target, we actually have, in the Jim Crow Museum, a metal piece that's this thick, solid iron, that's got bullet holes riddled through it. All right? Actually, we have 2 of them. And periodically, if you go on the internet, you'll see the FBI, the CIA, or some local police department has gotten in trouble because at their annual picnic or their annual roundup, somebody brought a paper or wooden version of that target and started using it, and it offended someone there. And so they end up in the newspaper. Again, go to Google and Google this when you leave. President Bush the Younger was often portrayed as a simian, whether it was an orangutan or a monkey. I believe that was an insult to him and his intelligence. In the case of President Obama, I think it is often an insult to his racial heritage. In this case, you have a sign that taps into that kind of historical connection between blacks and simians. And I don't want to defame the whole Tea Party, by the way. I love activism. I think activism is the coolest thing, and I hate taxes. So you're asking, why am I not in the Tea Party then? I believe activism is one of the great things about this country. However, there is a part of that movement that brings those two things together in a very ugly way. This right here is a costume. I won't tell you where it was made or sold, but it rhymes with Ballmark, which is actually written up there. And if you notice, it's 1682, which is relevant to me because that means that it's accessible to almost any class of people in our country. In other words, you don't have to be rich to purchase it. And I gave a presentation before Michigan Honors Society. We had the honors kids from all of the different colleges, and we were up in a cabin somewhere. And I brought some objects, and this was one of them. And I held this object, and I did what I would do in the museum. See, unlike here, where I'm doing all this talking, in the museum, what I'd be doing is giving you a piece and saying, when you look at this, what is it you see? And so I did that there, and I asked them, when you see this, what is it you see? And I would say almost all of the students there, they were from University of Michigan, Michigan State, all different schools around. Almost everyone there said, it's offensive. And then I said, how many of you believe it's racist? And only about a third of the people raised their hands. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, kung fu? You're mocking a part of the really important part of various Asian cultures. I mean, I'm a martial artist myself. I got nothing but love for that whole tradition, or those traditions. And you do the thing with the buck teeth, okay, which comes out of a physical caricature from the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. Even back before that, actually, when the Chinese arrived in this country in the 1880s, and almost quick, as soon as they got here, you start seeing that image. So I'm thinking, how is this not racist? And so I asked, what would it take to make that racist? And almost unanimously, they said what? Make it black. Wow. So what is it we do when people step outside the script? We have prescribed, what is it prescribed, what people should do and they shouldn't do from the time you're born. Here we have a person, and again, forget the politics part of it. So you think she's too liberal or she's too whatever, so what? The fact of the matter is that in this case, she's not being judged by our policies, but the idea is she's trying to be a what? A man. Because she's violating the gender expectations that we have for women in this culture. And I'll tell you what, that is very reminiscent of another thing, which is when you have peoples of color being told you're trying to be what? Say it. White. See? And so she then gets a penis. And again, people laugh at that and go, oh, that's funny. But it's revealing. It's revealing. If you're going to have a sign where you encourage people to speak a certain language, spell the words right. All right, that's number one. Number two, and here's one of the points I want you to remember. California used to be occupied by Californos. It's San Jose, San Diego. It's not Millertown, okay? Texas used to have a group called the Hispanos. You get where I'm going with this? In other words, they're indigenous. Forget the manifest destiny thing for a minute. They're indigenous. They are Native Americans. They are Native Americans. Every time immigration debates happen nationally, we have protests and the like, but we also have new objects created. Stop illegal alien invasion, as if Romulans are coming here. Freeloading illegals are raping U.S. taxpayers. Boy, just, why you put rape in there? When you put the word rape in there, you trivialize the people in our society that are raped. Rape has a specific meaning in our culture. This is a game where you kill the Mexicans as they cross the borders. One of the most pernicious ways to spread racial ideas are through games and toys. This is the only quote that I have that I use from H. Ross Perot. Any of you that know H. Ross Perot would probably not find that surprising. But I have a lot of love for this quote. I watch people all the time. They fly into a place, somebody brings them in, they come in, and they look and they go, you know what, your river's dirty. And then they go get on an airplane. Well, hell, the people knew it was dirty. That's why they brought you in. And there are a lot of folks who can tell us what's wrong, and they don't like today, I'm almost done. I spent today this morning at Mel Trotter Ministries. And I was thinking to myself, the criticism that they would get from people because they have a Christian focus, as it were. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if you don't like the way they're doing it, don't do it differently, just do something additionally. Does that make sense? Find another way to feed people, an additional way to do it, and let them do their thing. And the way I clean the river, it's not pleasant. It's not pleasant at all. I mean, there's a metaphor that didn't show up in Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail that almost made it in there. And I really wish he had left that in there. But he considered the metaphor too coarse, and so he took it out. But it was the metaphor that said that, in effect, that racism was like a boil. It wasn't a boil. It's not a disease. It's like a disease, but it's not a disease. He said it's like a boil. And if you just pretend you don't have a boil on your leg or your butt or your chest or wherever boils grow, that doesn't mean the boil is not there. And if you put a Band-Aid on it, that doesn't get rid of it. He said, lance it and let all the ugly pus, see, it doesn't fit the rest of that letter. That letter is so beautiful. That letter from Birmingham jail is so, it's like one of the great open letters written to the American people. You can't have such an ugly analogy in there, right? But I think it was, you know, that's what we try to do at the Jim Crow Museum, is to look at it like a boil. We don't celebrate it as a boil, but we lance it. And in that little room, we are having some of the deepest discussions about race and sex and homophobia and all these topics that's going on in this whole country, and we're not afraid. We're not afraid to have the discussions. You know, there's little out of the 60s that I'll recommend to you. I wasn't alive, really. But there's little out of that period that I will. The music was bad. What are you, 8 years old, and you're going to argue with me about that? The music was bad and all of this, but they used to have rap sessions, and I wish you would bring those back. I wish young people today would go back to rap sessions. I was at the Missouri Historical Museum. They had a room called the Talking Room, and they had signs up. And there was a room just with circles. I mean, just with a circle, with chairs around in a circle. And they basically had a few rules. And the only rules were, don't hit anybody, don't threaten to hit anybody, and let the other person finish talking. And I'm thinking, wow, we've reached a point in our culture, we're afraid to talk, just afraid to be challenged. So there's a way that I clean the river, and the river needs to be clean. That's an 1896 print that's reprinted all the time. So I didn't want to end on that image, so I leave it right here, but I want you to remember the image I had. And then I have a really short thing I want to read to you. And I always like to end these with it's not this thick, trust me. All right. So, well, maybe I should put it back, just so you can have it in your mind. Okay. This is called Civility. The cock crows tomorrow at 6:33, and I've been looking for civility for several years. On the playground, the children chant, U-G-L-Y, you don't have an alibi, you're ugly. Yeah, you're ugly. A 7-year-old claimed that pimping ain't easy. I was looking for civility, but I found children who told their parents to shut up and parents who shut up. School children who played hide-and-go-seek with real killers, teenage boogeymen, and journalists who stuck microphones near the faces of grieving mothers and asked, "How does it feel to lose your daughter? Tell our viewers how it feels." Like Jeremiah from the Old Testament, I desperately needed to find righteous people. A man in the airport, my brother, born of different parents, wore a shirt that read, "Bitch, don't make me pull an OJ on you." I told him to take it off. It gives offense. He said, "Mind your own business." I said, "It is my business, brother." He said, "Shut up." I said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." And from his mouth came an F train. "You flippin', flying, fat, freaking, fainting, fake, frickin', flakin' French," or something like that. The airport security guard told me that I talk funny and to leave him alone, the man with the shirt that said, "Bitch, don't make me pull an OJ on you." I went looking for civility. A female student belched long and loud like a horn, announcing the arrival of royalty, coarse and vulgar, like the frat boys at Animal House. And from the back of the room, a male voice yelled, "Good one," and the class erupted in laughter. I had students who came to class late with cell phones ringing, no books, no pencils, leaving warm beds to sleep in my class, demanding, asserting their right to not know, not sacrifice, not commune, demanding their customer rights. Legs open, minds closed, lips profane, leaving early. Rudeness is a lack of respect for others. It is selfishness, and the man in my mirror is victim and offender. I went looking for civility. I found supervisors who walk out during employees' presentations, office managers who find their perfect orgasm with pink slips, workers angry, disgusted, caressing and nursing that bitter pill, been wrong, knowing it, showing it, uncivilly fighting incivility. Disgruntled workers who spit or pee in Big Brother soup, not metaphorically, and everywhere the chorus I hear is, "What about me? What about mine?" It is easy to see incivility in others. At D&W, an elderly man picks his nose, a teenager talks on her cell phone, a woman cuts in line, and a boy makes a sandwich with the store's food. At the office, a man with bad breath, Marlboros, and coffee wants to tell me a secret, gossip that tears down. I want to hear. At church, the preacher reminisces that he grew up in a family without Christians, a Catholic uncle, but no Christians. A colleague forwards blonde jokes. The doctor is late for an appointment he made. On television talk shows, guests fight, curse, and degrade themselves, their families, and us for their 15 minutes of fame, infamy, and I watch. Politicians say you lie on the Congress floor. Police probe rears with batons. Kanye sings about gold diggers and broke niggas and snatches the mic and stage. Ann Coulter threatens ragheads talk tough, ragheads face consequences. William Bennett rids America of crime by ridding America of black babies, theoretically. A little Tea Party protester stands, holds a sign that says, "Obamonomics, monkey see, monkey spin." Where is civility? If you say, "Good morning, how are you, have a pleasant day," and then use your position to hurt others, that is not civility, that is hypocrisy. Not cursing does not make one civil. If a man never says the S word but treats people like the S word, he is a hypocrite and he makes my stomach hurt. A man threw a cup from his car window, another parked in a handicap zone, another stopped his car in the middle of the road to talk, another cut through a parking lot to avoid a traffic light, then yelled to a woman, "Hey girl, give me that sweater." I found road rage, horns blaring, middle fingers waving, fists flailing, criminal trial dates. And then I found something. I lectured to Phil Middleton's class. I took his students to the Jim Crow Museum. I showed them the ugliness, the mammy, the sambo, the pickaninny, the caricatured sores foisted on us, the propaganda directed against us. I showed them, showed it all. And we went deep, deeper than ever, deeper than I meant to go. After 3 hours, they had left all but two, a young black woman and a middle-aged white man. The woman sat paralyzed, transfixed, and stunned before a picture of nude black children. At the bottom of the picture were these words, "Alligator bait." She sat there watching it, trying to understand the hands that made it, the mind that conceived it. She didn't say a word, but her eyes, her frown, the hand at her forehead all said, "Why? Sweet Jesus, why?" This story is really about the white man. He stopped staring at the items and instead stared at me. He was crying, not a sob, a single tear stream, like the old commercial. I wanted to say something, to be the teacher, the make it right teacher, you know, the master teacher. Before I could fix this thing, he said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Pilgrim, forgive me." All of my years of collecting racist garbage, I never realized how much I needed to hear some person, any sincere person, say, "I am sorry." Not because it was the politically right thing to do, the hell with that. And not because it seemed like the socially right thing to do, no. I needed a real apology, not a religious apology, nor a liberal one, just a real one, the kind of apology where both people know that they won't be the same afterwards. I explained to him that he didn't make any of the objects, therefore he didn't owe me an apology. On my way home to Rockford, I cried. It was the first time I cried about the objects in the Jim Crow Museum. It sounds corny, but I cried like someone had died, like someone had been born, cleansed myself of hatred with a stranger's tears. And then I knew what civility was. Civility is treating others with respect. It is sharing pain. It is being broken down, then put together again. Not haughty, but humble servitude. Civility is more than enduring others. It is this: whatsoever you would that others do unto you, do that unto them. Thank you. So I guess we have a chance for a few questions.
If you have a question, raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you so we can capture it on the film.
And I only want really, really hard questions.
Lay it on him.
You don't allow them to ask questions at Grand Rapids Community College?
First of all, I want to thank you for that speech. I hadn't actually looked forward to coming here tonight, but your speech was actually very motivational, and it brings up so many issues that I hope people think about. I know I'll think more about, and I have a young son, and I certainly hope he thinks about those kinds of issues. And I have hope that I think the younger generation will. But anyways, my question is, I don't know if you've traveled to the East and the West Coast. Do you find that people are more liberal than in the Midwest? It seems so often here we're stuck, especially in West Michigan, with the same small town thinking, I guess.
No. It's one of the things I have to remind myself to do is when I get done collecting garbage, to go and collect really healthy things. And one of the things I started doing a few years back when in anticipation of moving the museum was collecting these affirming pieces, as it were. And I find those pieces everywhere, just like I find the racist pieces everywhere. I find people doing good work everywhere. There are literally hundreds. I mean, let me do better than that. There are tens of thousands of people and hundreds of organizations that are working every day to make this a more democratic and egalitarian culture. They are as likely to be in the Midwest as they are to be in other places. So my answer to that would be no. It's really easy to stereotype the South, or and I have to confess something. I was even a little happy when that picture of the little boy was from Denver and not Mobile, Alabama, you know, my home state or whatever. But I've often heard, and there's some survey evidence about racial differences or you know, different parts of the country. But in terms of my experiences, you know, it looks a lot the same on both poles and in the middle. So. Yes.
I do media work in town, monitoring media, things similar to kind of the same stuff you do, looking at racial representation. I'm just wondering, in terms of how it fits into all the items, the artifacts that you have, I mean, I just want us to spend a little time listening to talk radio in this country, and even in this community, on listen to Clear Channel, Hannity and Limbaugh and et cetera and so forth. I mean, how does that sort of the normalizing and the sort of the cumulative effect of people using that kind of language on a regular basis fit into the kind of work you're doing with these historical artifacts?
Well, I like when you said normalizing, because what happens is when you repeat a thing over and over, it does become, Flip Wilson used to say, the comedian Flip Wilson used to say, a lie is as good as the truth if you can get everybody to believe it. And I think that a lot of these ideas, we throw them out there. And in the case, like with President Obama, I would wager if you name the 10 or 20 groups that we've hated in the last 40 years, just name any group, there was an attempt to portray him as a member of that group. And so, that's amazing to me. In terms of the radio piece, I mean, there are a lot of Americans that are afraid. And, I mean, it's really easy, especially for someone who's a sociologist, to just sort of poo-poo radio shows like Rush Limbaugh's show, Mr. Limbaugh's show. But the reality is that a lot of people, for them, that's the news. It's not just, they're not listening for entertainment. That's where they get their news from. And that show is relevant for them. And in part, it's relative for them. And please hear me when I say this. Many Americans are afraid. Now, whether or not they have an objective basis for their fear, or if we want to debate the objective basis, that's one thing. But they are afraid. In times of rapid social change, and especially when you couple rapid social change with rapid cultural change and economic problems, you get people who are more likely to listen to some of that, because it gives them an answer. It gives them an answer. Watch this survey right here. How many of you have heard the world's going to end in 2012? Raise your hands. See, that's frightening. Okay, you don't know me, and so you don't know, okay, the world's not going to end in 2012. Okay, it's just not going to. It didn't end in 2000. It didn't end in 1984. It didn't end in 1920. We've been waiting for that. The world ends when you die. Okay, then the world has ended, and you're going to die. There are, getting close to 7 billion people on this earth. The thing we share in common is our humanity, this journey we have. We're going to all die. That's when the world is going to come to an end, okay? But the fact of the matter is, in a bad economy, with a dark-skinned president in the White House, with all this change happening now, this idea that it's over, and they feed that kind of paranoia often, and people buy into it. Here's another one. How many of you have heard that President Obama is the Antichrist? Raise your hands. See, that's amazing. Okay, let's try this one more time. He is not the Antichrist. Okay, he is not the Antichrist. Okay, he's just not. All right, so, and right now there's someone sitting in this room going, how the hell does he know? He could be wrong. Okay, so I think that what happens is in times like this, people are more vulnerable for it. I can tell you this, when President Obama was raising his hand to accept the oath to be President of the United States, the undermining of his presidency had already started. And in part, some of that was by talk radio. Now, on the flip side, the left did very nasty things to President Bush, okay? And nasty signs and other stuff. Yes?
Okay, how you doing? Thanks again. I seen you Sunday at the Soul.
Are you stalking me, brother?
No, but I enjoyed you there, and
Because I have stalkers, so I need. Can you let me know where you're going to be in the future? Okay, go ahead.
I enjoyed you so much, so I brought my wife. And
Okay.
I just told her that she needed to hear you, though. But my question to you is, I still have this, as an African American, I still ask this question, why? I understand the history of America, and just through these images and things that, have portrayed blacks in a certain way. Do you find people still ask that simple question, okay, well, blacks has been portrayed this way, and we understand that, but why have they allowed that to happen, or why haven't they become able to overcome that? That's just a simple question that I still have as an African American male. I still say, okay, yes, okay, I think of it as a war. Yes, you might have lost a war. A lot of cultures have experienced a lot of tragedies in there, in many cultures. But this culture, for some reason, this race of people seems to deal with more than many others. And what answer do you give to people?
Well, I'm trying to, your question, you said it's a simple question, but it's actually not a simple question, and it's got many, many parts. But let me just say this. If I could magically take if we had a Star Trek, transporter room, and although I don't think they did time travel, but if we could do a time travel piece where we went back, my math skills are not all that great here, but let's say we could get back 500 years ago. Certainly if we can get back 600, 700 years ago. The notions of race that we have, that apparently is me. The notions of race that we have did not exist in that same way. Like if I could get back to ancient Egypt, and the question that I asked my students earlier, which was, in terms of Michael Chang and Pete Sampras and others, what are you? Their answers would have been very different. Their answers would have been based on things wholly different from notions of race that we have. But they would have been answers about dividing people. The notions of groups dividing has always been there. And hate, H-A-T-E, as an organizing, bonding mechanism has always been there. Now, I'm not going back to Homo erectus and Peking man and Australopithecus. I'm talking about, in more modern times than that. Hate has always been an organizing factor. Now, skip up to the United States. Slavery existed in many cultures, including cultures in this hemisphere. But one of the differences in the United States is that once a slave was no longer a slave, they were still considered inferior. And unlike, say, Brazil, where you have a higher manumission rate, marrying others rate and all this other stuff. Now, why is that important? Because what it meant is that every major social, political institution in our society supported the system, okay? You cannot have where the family, the government, religion, the economics, the whole system, it was so ingrained. Unless you understand how deeply that was a part of our culture, it's hard to understand why we still live with some of the remnants of it. Now, skip from that to the period of Jim Crow, which is what I study. The Jim Crow period was an attempt to re-enslave African Americans by stripping them of various rights, as it were. That period just ended officially, probably with the Voting Rights Act or some of the other legislation in the 1960s and 1970s. So I would turn the question around, and my answer to you would be this. Not so much that I would be shocked that we're still dealing with it. I think in the last 30, 40 years, we've made a tremendous progress toward getting rid of what was a central set of principles in our culture. So my answer would be, I am hopeful that 50 years from now, we'll be more democratic than we are today, because I believe we're more democratic, egalitarian than we were years back. Here's one proof of it. When I showed those images today, what year is this, 2010? When I showed those images in 2010, this is a mostly white audience. At least I'm using whatever perception abilities I have. But this is a mostly white audience. I saw disgust in the faces of people young and old. That disgust I would not have seen a half century ago. You see what I mean? I mean, it's a kind of perverted measure of progress, as it were, the amount of disgust that people have. So my answer is this right here. I try to look at the totality of the American experience and the African experience in this country. Given where it started, I actually think that there's been considerable progress done. Obviously, given the work that I do, there's more progress needed. Okay. I'm sorry for that long answer. That's just, but there's no, I get nervous sometimes when people give these short answers like on TV and stuff, and they give it, I'm like, that's ridiculous. Maybe we have a chance for, yes.
I think what my question or comment is builds on what he is asking. And I'm personally uncomfortable with 11 o'clock every Sunday being the most segregated hour in our society. And I'm surprised in one way that you didn't tie in the churches, because basically I think a lot of the people that are holding those signs and screaming and taking that viewpoint probably do show up at their churches every Sunday. So, you know, in a Christian-based society, and knowing what we know today, help us sort that out. How can you be Christian-based and yet still feel that angry and that negative?
Well, a person can be Christian and be afraid, right? I mean, a person can be Christian. I mean, they're probably going to pray something different than I would, but they can be afraid. They can also be unemployed. They can also be a bigot. I mean, they can. But now, on the other hand, let's be fair. Much of the work of racial reconciliation in this country is done by religious groups. I mean, when I go to conferences, I don't think it's an accident that a lot of the really hard work is done by groups that you and I would call evangelicals, okay? But there's the other group, other part of it that gets a lot of the attention, as it were. And I don't think it's surprised the civil rights movement was a religious movement. You know, and the whites who were out there were often religious also, okay? So, I mean, I just want us to be careful with that piece. Now, to the question of segregation in churches, you know, we are in terms of the things we do for fun, pleasure, worship, whatever, in other words, the things we can choose to do, we are segregated. But that's we individually. Now, some of that's residential based, because like in Rockford, where I live, you know, there aren't churches with, I mean, every church I go to, I'm the diversity, you know, in that church. And so I have to travel into Grand Rapids to go to a diverse church. And most people do that kind of thing by convenience. Now, it's also the case, though, that people align themselves in terms of people they believe to be like-minded. So I think there's something to what you're saying. In other words, that you certainly have a lot of churches, and I want to be very careful with the way I say this. Okay, they are Christian in a different way than say my grandmama was. I mean, they have a politicized Christianity that's basically just a conservative viewpoint where you share that on a Sunday kind of thing. When I think of people with deep, meaningful faith, doesn't mean we have to agree on our political views, but it certainly means that I wouldn't expect the anger and bitterness and what approximates hate that comes out of some groups. Now, the other part is you get that same hatred among atheists. You know, you get that same hatred among agnostics. You know, so I don't think we can just lump it into those, you know, kind of categories like that. Maybe we have one more?
One more.
Okay. These are not hard. They're just hard to answer.
I noticed you had a lot of pictures from the Tea Party protests. And then I noticed, and I was at the G20 protest back in September. And it seems to me like the Tea Party protests get portrayed in a more like positive light than the G20 ones did, like by the media and stuff in general.
Yeah.
But there's a lot more racism and stuff that you see with the Tea Party ones. And there wasn't really that much that I noticed at G20.
Okay. Well, some of that's just what the image. I just need to make a point because there's no shortage of images out there. I mean, I had a choice of literally hundreds and hundreds of negative images, and some of them would have come from other groups. So that was more just, you know, just I don't like using the same images at every presentation. And so I switched the images that I had used at some recent presentations. And actually with this one, what I tried to do was to take 3 or 4 presentations and mush them in together. But there's no shortage of images out there. I mean, and you're right, but again, as I try to be fair, what I would say is that people on the left often have on their fringes really hate-filled images. One image I didn't put up there is the image of President Obama as Hitler. And there's a lot of images of him and some really funky images talking about the gas chamber and stuff like that. I thought that would be overkill for me to do that. But again, I'll make a point I made similar to the one about rape, and that is that you basically had millions of people killed, and we can debate the numbers, whether it was 5.8 million Jews and 5.6 million others or whatever the numbers are, but millions of people were killed by the Third Reich, and to refer to anybody as Adolf Hitler trivializes the deaths of all those people. So, and I've seen those images from both groups. I mean, and those are just, again, you know, when you lose civility, and when every opponent becomes an enemy, then all's fair. And then when you layer it with historical images of race, you get the kind of stuff that we've seen. Well, I want to thank you for your attention. There were only 4 people not paying attention. I'll point them out now, if that's okay. You don't do that here? In my undergraduate school, they used to post your midterm grades on the library door. You know, and then when we got kicked out of school, it was a Christian school. When we got kicked out of school, the Greyhound bus came through the campus to get you. And people would be waving. It was like an old